And the approach I have to innovation is called a rule-breaking approach to research. Tell people, if you can blot out the white-hot sun of LLM acceleration and AI acceleration, you will see the stars of data privacy and quantum computing and intermittent computing and low power. I'm not one to think like, if it's not going to change the world immediately, it's not something we should work on. I think if it's interesting as a problem and has what I call legs, and that you can take that idea and use it elsewhere, then I think it's a good problem to work on. Take your security mechanisms and explore how you can rework them into privacy mechanisms. Because privacy is not a value expected technology, it's a value added technology. Then the question is, what's the difference between hardware security and data privacy? Hardware security is the endeavor to stop hacking. Data privacy is the endeavor to give control over who can see and use and understand your data back to the owner of that data. That, of course, requires very good security, but it also requires access control capabilities, probably encrypted computation, integrity checking, a lot of other stuff that you normally wouldn't do for high security and stopping hacking.
Hi, everyone. We are super happy and thrilled to invite Todd Austin for our interview today.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
Today, we got an IEEE macro and TCuARCH interview with our dear professor. I'm Jianming Tong, a PhD student from Georgia Tech.
And I'm Todd Austin from University of Michigan. Nice to see you all.
First of all, big congrats for the IEEE CSB Ramakrishna Raw Award.
Thank you.
In recognition of outstanding contribution in microarchitecture, performance analysis, and innovation in secure architecture. Unfortunately, the award speech seems not available online. Could you please share some of the award speech for our audience who couldn't attend?
Sure. When you get the Ramakrishna Rao Award, you give lunch remarks. And so I spoke briefly at lunchtime about how I do innovation. And the approach I have to innovation is called a rule-breaking approach to research. So I talked about how when you identify a rule in your area of research that nobody ever breaks, sometimes breaking that rule, even if you don't know how to break that rule, can be really valuable because nobody ever breaks that rule. And so an example I gave is some work that I gave earlier in my career on Razor. There's a project called Razor, which one of the rules in VLSI design is every circuit has to complete every cycle. And so what we did is we broke that rule. We said not every circuit has to complete every cycle. We're going to add recovery logic to the design so that if some circuits don't complete, they'll get a little bit extra time. And what we found is we could almost cut the amount of energy typical circuits need in half. So, and then I gave lots of examples of those type of innovations. And then I had ChatGPT give some examples of those type of innovations as well. It did a pretty good job, I must say.
Wow, that's fantastic. Also, achieving half reduction is an amazing speed up for all of these existing architectures. You are such a role model in commercialized research into a product. Is there any story behind the creation of the startup, Awardee Labs?
Yeah, that started in 2018, still going. And it's a data privacy startup. It didn't start out a data privacy startup. It started out a secure CPU startup. And it came out of a DARPA project that I had started in 2017 to build a secure CPU called Morpheus. And I really like working with DARPA because DARPA tends to take projects. They usually have phases in their programs. And one phase is, where you propose what you're going to do, and the second phase you build, and then in the third phase you compete. And in that particular effort, we competed against a number of different secure CPU designs, and we were the only design that wasn't hacked. So we said, "Oh, this is such an innovation that we're gonna do a startup behind it." It was really hard to sell hardware security. So eventually we pivoted into data privacy, and that's what the technology that Awardee Labs sells today is in data privacy. We sell technologies that are like homomorphic encryption, but they're microarchitecture based. So they're not quite as secure, but they're very efficient and easy to program. And that's the space that we moved into.
Really fantastic to learn the history and it's going on. From your perspective, how did security and privacy as a field and a community change from when you first started as a graduate student?
Yeah, well, hardware security didn't even exist when I was a graduate student. And I worked in hardware security for about a decade before there was even a viable vulnerability demonstrated in the area. I remember when I would teach hardware security here, I would give lists of potential problems that could happen in the future. And then I have to thank owner Mutlu and his team for discovering the Rowhammer vulnerability, which was really the first really meaningful hardware security vulnerability, one that we haven't even fixed today. And then in January 2018, I got another Christmas gift when Gruce and Genkin and Kocher all simultaneously invented the Spectre and Meltdown attack, which I call the double whammy of hardware security, because after Rowhammer and Spectre and Meltdown were on the scene and demonstrated to be viable hardware security attacks, now I was no longer trying to convince students that hardware security was a good thing to think about. There was now evidence that these attacks were at least demonstratable. And then a lot of people say, well, they haven't been weaponized yet, right? So how much should we focus on hardware security attacks if they haven't been weaponized and used against people in commercial applications? Well, they may never be weaponized because the community is really trying to address them proactively. But I always like to give the example of the buffer overflow software vulnerability. This is the most common vulnerability that exists today. And it was first theorized in 1972 and first deployed in 1988. So there were 16 years between when the vulnerability was first conceived and when it was actually weaponized. And then today, last Tuesday, Microsoft fixed a bunch of these. So that it's something that's very, very hard to stop.
Oh, super shocked to hear that hardware security did not even exist back then. What's the motivation behind that? I'm super curious about it.
Why
people started to think about it?
Well, I think people, personally, I theorized, with other members of the sort of nascent hardware security community, Srini Devadas at MIT, for example, we saw there were opportunities to exploit hardware vulnerabilities, but we hadn't successfully demonstrated that yet. This is even true for, it was true for like hardware Trojans at the time. Those have been demonstrated many times since then. But I think the nature of research is trying to identify the problems before they become, impactful to society, especially in security.
What is your favorite part of Agita Labs and hardware security part of research?
The favorite part of working on that research? Well, it's really fun to build stuff that people can't hack. I really enjoy that. I remember, so I've now had the opportunity to build 3 different machines that people have not been able to hack when we've hired people to try and hack those machines. That is really gratifying. Finding a new hardware vulnerability and demonstrating that is very exciting. Very exciting for many different ways. Like I hold the record for the smallest hardware Trojan, 3 transistors, demonstrated in 2016 with my colleague Dennis Sylvester here at University of Michigan. And that was the first hardware Trojan that really suggested you could put it on in the fab instead of in the design house. And so now we have to start trusting our fabrication facilities. But which today, now we all worry about whether we trust our fabrication facilities or not. The U.S. CHIPS Act is trying to reshore to the U.S. A lot of semiconductors, both to shore up the supply chain as well as to provide better national security in terms of silicon production for, sensitive applications. When you do these, what's also exciting about this, when you do these, you always upset people too. I remember when we did our Trojan, I got an email from a retired general that said I was a bad American for working on that. But then I emailed him back and said, well, who would you rather learn about this vulnerability, from me or from somebody who got attacked by an adversary? And even today, I love working on vulnerabilities and demonstrating vulnerabilities. So one thing I've been doing for the last couple of years is demonstrating how Rust, which has this veneer of unimpenetrable security, how Rust, safe Rust, is vulnerable to hardware security attacks. So I've demonstrated Spectre and Rust. I've had some projects in my courses here that we'll release soon to demonstrate. Rowhammer working on Rust. Because I really want to demonstrate to the Rust community that you're not secure if you're not considering the hardware vulnerabilities as well. That upsets them to no end. And it is, I find that very exciting, personally.
I can feel the excitement, and also I'm driving by that as well. Yeah, can you give us an overview of your journey from when you first become interested into security research to today?
Yeah, sure. My journey started in program debugging. So, in fact, one of my very first projects was developing a project that added fat pointers to C so that you could detect when you had memory access errors. Now, that sounds a lot like the Cherry processor, which is one of the most advanced hardware security designs in the world today. And that is true because program debugging and hardware security are very related. Program debugging is find functional errors in your program. Hardware security verification and validation is find bugs in your program that people can exploit. So it's kind of a subset of that. Where I got really entrenched in security was in 2012 when I took my sabbatical in Ethiopia, and they said I went there to teach classes, and the way courses work at AAIT, Addis Ababa Institute of Technology, is it's a set menu. So students take the courses, in the third semester, you take a specific group of courses, which has its ups and downs. On the plus side, you can reschedule a class by just talking to one student. On the downside, if you get sick or pregnant and you have to miss class for a semester, you lose a whole year because you have to resync the next year. But for me, that meant I had to teach a security class. That was the class I could teach. And I'd never taught a security class. I've never taken a security class. But any professor will tell you the best way to learn material is to teach the material to students. But I always joke to my students that I was only 1 hour ahead of them in terms of their knowledge, which was a problem because it was an hour and a half class. So that last half an hour was a little bit dodgy. But I did learn a lot, and that got me very interested in security. And then because I was a computer architect, I got more interested in hardware security. And then when Rowhammer landed in 2014, then, things were really solidified. That was a good direction for me. I was going to keep one solid vector in the hardware security domain.
Wow, that's a really fantastic beginning of teaching a class and then starting a research on that.
Yeah.
You have many achievements and accolades from secure computer architecture community. What do you think is the one thing that enables you to do meaningful and impactful work with people coming from different backgrounds and cultures?
That's a good question. I look at it a little bit differently. I see, if I want to do meaningful and impactful work, I want to work with people from different backgrounds, right? Because if we're all the same and we have all the same experiences, then we just have more hands, so we can do more work, but it's the same work that we would do. When you bring people from other backgrounds to the project, you get different perspectives. And all of a sudden you start getting ideas that you didn't think about before. I'll give you a great example. I worked with a student, Bill Arthur, who's a lecturer here at University of Michigan, teaches the fifth biggest class at the university, our non-majors computing course, which has 2,600 students in it every semester. It's the fifth largest class, mind you. Bill is a non-traditional student. He worked on the Ford assembly line for 21 years, got laid off, went and finished his bachelor's degree at University of Michigan, Flint, and did so well, came into our PhD program, then worked with me. And at the time, I was trying to figure out how to stop control flow injection, which is how do you stop someone from doing a buffer overflow or injecting code into your machine, even return-oriented program where you don't have to inject code. And so Bill's learning about this, and he's basically he's synthesized it down to someone has to move their information into your program counter. And so Bill comes up with this idea, this wacky idea. Don't allow people to move data into the program counter. And then I go, well, then you can't have a return instruction. You can't have it jump through a register. Yes. And he goes, well, I think I can build a program without those two instructions. And we built a whole project on that. We called it subtractive security. So we take out the ability, we sever the link between the control of the program and the data of the program, and you can't get off the control flow graph. You can't. It's not possible. And it was a really interesting effort because it for the first time we could make very strong proofs about what we could do in terms of control flow injection. Now, of course, we made building programs a lot more complicated, but we came up with a bunch of optimizations and compiler profiling optimization, and the programs were almost as efficient as programs that were very vulnerable to control flow injection. It was a really cool project, and it helped me think a little bit differently. Like, I don't want to be a security person that has to hope that no one breaks my defenses. I want to build defenses that I know you can't break because you don't know how. I mean, there is no path between data and the program counter, or you don't know how to break AES, or you cannot factor large integers better than any other human on the planet. So I like that approach. And that really came from working with somebody that was just bringing really fresh eyes to the problem.
Oh, now I know the exact history and the reasoning for this work has been coming into the reality. What is your criteria for embarking on a project or collaboration during different stages of your career? Like balancing the depths and widths?
Balancing what?
Balancing the depths and the width.
Okay. Yeah, I just sort of stumble into stuff. I just try to remain open-minded. I think, research is a journey. So I've been working a lot on encrypted computation in the microarchitecture, which is an alternative to things like fully homomorphic encryption. And so you end up with this comparison where, well, FHE is more secure, but it's way harder to program. But your microarchitecture techniques, if someone can measure inside the hardware these secret values, then you are basically do an analog side channel attack. You are vulnerable. So then now I've become very interested in how to stop analog side channel attacks. That's kind of the core of my new work that I'm working on now. Then I'm always interested in sort of wacky ideas to work on on the side. Like I have a project right now I'm working on, which is a piece of malware. It's not live, but a piece of malware that will add a Trojan to every design in a company that it makes. And so I've been having fun with that project. So if it's, I'm just trying to be very open to student suggestions, to ideas. I do a lot of reading. I try to stay up on the press, technical press, as much as possible. I read a lot of papers and then just try to cook up what sounds interesting that maybe nobody else is looking at all. And I do explicitly try to stay out of the sort of the most populated lanes of computer architecture. Like, I don't work on AI accelerators. I think they're incredibly important and they're changing the world. It's just not where I am. I want to work on other stuff. So I always tell people, if you can blot out the white hot sun of LLM acceleration and AI acceleration, you will see the stars of data privacy and quantum computing and intermittent computing and low power. So I tend to work off the main routes which of course we have to work on those other things, but we also have to work on other stuff as well. So I tend to try to go a little bit a different direction as well.
I think the remaining open mind is really a fantastic feature, and also remaining open mind will bring you a lot more different research direction. Would that be a kind of like distraction, or how do you balancing that depth versus the width of the research scope?
Yeah, you have a lot of ideas, and then you try to match student opportunities to ideas. I like to work with a lot of undergrads because I think you can take it. I try to do my most speculative work with undergrads because they come and go very quickly, and in Michigan here, they're super talented. They don't want a PhD; they just want a letter from me when they go to grad school. So that's a really great relationship we can have. And then more mature work, I want to then pair up with PhD students. And then sometimes you have ideas that you can't really marry to anybody, and you're still looking for an opportunity. So I mean, maybe someone that's seen this video has gotten an email from me pitching them an idea. I'm always pitching ideas to everybody. I tend to work on ideas I can't do by myself because I think it's more interesting to approach problems like that.
Yeah. How do you define good problems?
Good problems. Yeah. Well, I'm not a stickler for big impact because I think a lot of if it's interesting to you and me, my student and I think that's enough. Of course, it's good if you can get funding agencies interested in it. But I'm not one to think like, if it's not going to change the world immediately, it's not something we should work on. I think if it's interesting as a problem and has what I call legs, and that you can take that idea and use it elsewhere, then I think it's a good problem to work on. So I'm not super picky about what I work on. Of course, you want to work on things that you have the skill set for. I'm fortunate in that I have good skill sets in systems and circuits and architecture and security, and and I know people. I know a lot of people. Like I've got formal verification people on speed dial, device people that I can talk to. So, yeah. As long as I can find put together the team, I can approach probably most problems if they're interesting.
Got it. Finding problem usually a hard topic for a grad student. And if you were a graduate student at this moment, which specific study or work will you be choosing and work on?
Yeah, I always advise grad students, don't be too picky about what your research is as a grad student. It's really, as a grad student, your main goal is to learn how to be a researcher. And you need to pick an area, computer architecture, circuits, compilers, but you can move out of that area into other spaces in your career. I always advise graduate students, don't place an expectation that your research is going to change the world. It may, but it's not a requirement for getting a PhD. Getting a PhD, you need to do a novel piece of research that has value to some part of the community, and that you can successfully present and defend that research. I think, keeping the PhD research expectations in check is one way to ensure that to give yourself the best chance of having a really great PhD. I generally see that as valuable.
Appreciate that insight. This is in speaking of what is Todd Ostling looking forward to the most in the next 10 years.
In the next 10 years? In my career, every 10 years, I do something different. So I would look forward to what's the new and interesting thing that I'm going to work on in the next 10 years. So in the first part of my career, I was in microarchitecture. In the next decade of my career, I was in reliability. The next decade, I was in scalable design and end of Moore's law. In the next decade, I was in hardware security, and I don't know. And then I look forward to whatever the next decade brings in terms of where I go next. I think it'll be exciting, nonetheless.
Yeah, the world is changing so fast, and then we are super excited to hear that things are changing more 10 years, and maybe in the future, it's going to changing even more frequently. Mm-hmm. Security also comes with overhead. What would you think the cost of the hardware security will be in the future?
Yeah. Well, I have a lot of thoughts about that. I think the cost of security, especially for hardware security, is basically prohibitive. And the reason why I think that is because nobody buys security. People expect security. So when you're building a product, that product, everything you put into that product should provide value in that product. Unfortunately, security is not really value because people expect the product to be secure. So if you're saying, hey, $5 more, this is going to be secure, they look at you like, why isn't the baseline secure? I don't want to pay for security. I expect security. And, in software, that's not quite so much of a problem. You have to develop it. There's a little bit of a non-recurring engineering cost with developing the software security, maybe a little bit of runtime cost. But for hardware security, you're paying silicon for every product to get that security. And that is, in essence, a tax. So what I tell hardware security people, and you can go to my YouTube, like and subscribe, and you can see a talks on this, is take your security mechanisms and explore how you can rework them into privacy mechanisms. Because privacy is not a value expected technology, it's a value added technology. If you add privacy technologies to a computing system, you can get more customers, you can get access to more data, you can create a different relationship with the clients that use that computer, and that is value added, and that's something that people will pay for. And so then the question is, what's the difference between hardware security and data privacy? Hardware security is the endeavor to stop hacking. Data privacy is the endeavor to give control over who can see and use and understand your data back to the owner of that data. That, of course, requires very good security, but it also requires access control capabilities, probably encrypted computation, integrity checking, a lot of other stuff that you normally wouldn't do for high security and stopping hacking. So I see that as really a path to mitigating the costs of security. But generally, I'm very down on whether or not we can get security so low cost that people would be fine with paying for it. And I think if you look in industry, you see lots of examples of how people come out with their security technologies. They're really amazing. And then after a few years, they pare them down to the absolute minimum that they can do and still provide any value. So
security is expected, and privacy actually enlarge the more market. That's I think something I agree so much more.
Let me give you an example. Like, I always like to use the example of fully homomorphic encryption. It's a very secure technology because it lets you compute on data that you cannot see. I personally would never give my genome to Ancestry.com because I know they're going to keep my genome and they're probably going to sell it. Right now, 23andMe is going out of business, and and everywhere in the privacy press you're seeing people say delete your data before they go out of business because they're going to sell your genome. Well, if there was a data privacy technology that would allow them to analyze my genome without being able to see my genome, and that couldn't be a promise from them, that has to be a technology that has crypto probably involved in it, then hey, I'll analyze my genome. They get a new customer. That's real value. That's real value. You can get around things like the California Consumer Privacy Act, which changes, the use of genetic data from opt out to opt in. And now, if it's encrypted, you can get around. Sometimes that allows you to do things under the law that you couldn't normally do. So there's a lot of capabilities with privacy technologies that are interesting to explore.
This is super fantastic to the next question as well. As a well-known professor who has succeeded across academia and industry experience, will you tell us something more on the story behind?
Yeah, Simple Scalar. Yeah, I'm impressed you know about that. Not many people know about that anymore. Simple Scalar was a tool that I built during my PhD, which it was a really early open source computer architecture tool that did execution-driven simulation. So at the time, most of the computer architecture work was done using traces, many of which we've got from Joel Emmer, who's now at NVIDIA, but at the time he was at DEC, and he built these modified microcode machines that would spew out the instructions they execute, and you get a trace of instructions. And I was really interested in speculation, and you couldn't do speculation on a trace because you didn't know what the misspeculation part of it was. And so I built this simulator that could run a program with an interpreter and could misspeculate on the program. And then the first thing I did is I wanted to show everybody who was doing trace-driven simulation that their numbers estimating the performance of their machines were way too optimistic because they weren't running the misspeculation traces. And so I ran Simple Scaler. This is in like 1992. I ran Simple Scaler with misspeculation turned on and with misspeculation not turned on. So you could turn off misspeculation. It would just run until it got to a mispredicted branch. It would stop, and then it would go on. And then you could also run, and it would go past the misspeculated branch, and it would not stop. And lo and behold, every program that misspeculated was faster than programs that did not misspeculate. And the reason is because you get run ahead in misspeculation. You pull things into your data cache, you pull things into your instruction cache that you're going to use when you come out of the misspeculation, and so it reduces the cost of recovering from misspeculation. And that led to run-ahead execution capabilities, the recognition of that. That led to the DIVA work that I did, which was a system that could tolerate design errors. It was a really interesting observation that a lot of people used in a lot of different computer architectures. It's one that I still always think about when I want to try and solve a problem. And so that was a lot of fun. Being able to do that. And then releasing it open source. I did that with Doug Berger, who's now at Microsoft. We released it together, built a release, and people started using it. And, today the papers that describe Simple Scaler have been cited over 7,000 times. Which is, it's awesome. It's the gift that keeps on giving.
Oh, wow. I think that's the biggest credit achievement.
Yeah, but it's old. I don't use it anymore. But it's a good part of history, I think.
History always inspiring new designs. Yeah. As one of the students who gets a lot of benefits from your online YouTube video, we are super curious about YouTube management because managing academia, industry, and also public education via YouTube is really a effort-demanding activity. Could you tell us something about your balance between all of them, including YouTube, LinkedIn, and research?
Yeah, sure. Well, I was partly inspired by owner Mutlu, who, like and subscribe him. He's been doing that longer than I have. He's been releasing his lectures, and it's a great resource. I see how many people use his lectures. I've had my students watch his lectures. And, even before YouTube, people like Mary Jane Irwin would release all of the slides for her classes, as just available. And that's such a valuable resource. So just giving away what you've got, I think is valuable because other people it has multiple benefits. Other people can learn from that. Like you said, you learn from my stuff, as well as it really establishes you as an authority on that particular topic. For me, the benefit I get is, of course I love it when students say that they benefit from the material. I think I'm getting more value from that. These are things I have to, I'm giving keynotes, I'm giving talks, I'm presenting work. Normally when you give a keynote, it's lost the time, it's just some slides on a file somewhere. And so it lets me preserve this information a little bit better. So I do like that. I got involved in LinkedIn in about 2020 when my business team at the startup Vegeta Labs said, Todd, you need to focus on your LinkedIn. And I just love it. I love it. I love the interactions I started on X actually, and then X just didn't work. X is the land of hot takes, and I do have hot takes, but I'm an educator and I like a little bit more space to educate. So that's why I like LinkedIn. If you go to my LinkedIn, please subscribe. If you go to my LinkedIn, you know, there's always stuff there that's interesting. I'm always commenting, and you know, if there's news that's relevant, it's mostly computer architecture and hardware security oriented. But if there's news, it's there. And then I always post. I have this sort of general stream of posts about topics with a slide and with just general discussion about the material. For me, that's how I extend the slide set for my classes. And then also I tend, you don't know this, but you can, if you sort of backtrack, I tend to talk about research I want to do in a way that gets people to attack it. So I can understand what are the things that I need to be proactive about in addressing that. I did that with, for example, I have this project on how do you build a piece of malware that can infect the whole industry. I posed that to my followers, and they gave me lots of information about how that would be hard to do, and then we would address. In a way, that is almost like getting one rejection of your paper for free.
Oh, I see. It's a public reviewing.
Yeah, exactly. So I now am hooked on LinkedIn. I have almost 28,000 followers, and yeah, it's fantastic. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, I follow your LinkedIn to learn a lot of the information.
Thank you very much.
I will advertise. As a graduate student, please subscribe. That's a really amazing material to learn. So now with all of this amazing research project, how to manage the group. How do you manage both the academia lab and startup at the same time to avoid conflict and to balance the time?
That's challenging. I'll say the way to be successful at it as a faculty member is your chair should not know you have a startup. Sometimes when people do startups, they just disappear, and that's okay. They can disappear. But when you disappear, you have to be not part of the department. You got to go on leave. I was on leave for a couple of years, and then I came back, and I was still involved in the startup. The key there is, I'm at the faculty meetings. I'm doing my service. I am providing value to the department. As soon as those things start to slip, then people will feel that you have a startup and that you're not dedicating yourself to your primary mission, which is faculty member. And so as long as you can find a solution that doesn't get your chair upset, and I tease my chair about this, then I think then you've found a good balance between the two.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a rule of thumb, always working methodology to deal with this.
And then I go to Tech Scrum a couple days. There's a Tech Scrum in our startup 4 days a week. So first of all, my startup has what's called Thoughtful Thursdays. No meetings allowed unless they're customer meetings. And so I never do anything with the startup on Thursday. And I go to Tech Scrum. So we have a Tech Scrum at 11 a.m. every day of the week. I go to that a couple days a week. There's a Business Scrum 2 days a week. I go to one of those. So, I'm dipping in. And that works out pretty well.
Oh, I could imagine you split 24/7. For other people, they might think there is multiple versions of Todd attending here and there all at the same time.
Same Todd. But yeah, split 27 ways. Yeah.
How do you get involved with researchers outside of your area? And how do you balance the exploration of new idea and contribution to the existing?
Yeah. So I love collaborating with researchers out of my area. I feel very strongly that any good collaboration is sort of built on friendship, right? Because when you collaborate with someone else, it takes a lot of trust, right? Because, over a long career and you collaborate a lot, you see the ways that collaborations can go sideways. I don't want to get into the details, but they go sideways a lot of different ways. And when they go sideways, you don't collaborate anymore. Then you find collaborators that it never goes sideways. I'll give an example. I've written loads of papers with Sherrod Malik at Princeton, and I love working with him. He's a great guy to work with, and he's a good friend. And we have a lot of trust, and we know that whatever we're going to work on together is going to end up being a good experience for both of us, even if we don't get to a paper on everything. So I would say, look at your friend circle. I always try to talk to my dean, pointing to her office in that direction. the wine and cheese events for faculty in the College of Engineering are very important. That's how you meet people, make friends, broaden your horizons, so that you can have interesting collaborations. I was fortunate enough to be involved in an ERC proposal for NSF, which involved a lot of computer scientists, computer engineers, circuits people, and material scientists. And I got to know a number of the material scientists pointing at their building over there, and made friends with a guy named John Huron. And now we want to figure out something to do together. So what would a computer engineer do with a material scientist? Try to figure out how to stop analog side channels and direct measurement of signals on your chip. That's exactly what that's what they do. That's what they do. So that's a really interesting and exciting collaboration. But I will say that, it really comes down to trust and friendship. That's how you make a great collaborator.
Got it. Now, given LLM super powerful and extremely popular, what area in security and privacy should people think about using LLM to improve?
Yeah, LLMs are really exciting. And just in my life, I use them all the time to help my kid with homework, to study research papers that I want it to read and explain to me. You work in ZKP. Any ZKP paper, first stop is ChatGPT. Tell me how this thing works. So, but in terms of data privacy, I first of all, I question to what extent do any companies that provide services on LLMs care about data privacy. I wonder about that. I hope they do, but do they? So that's an interesting question. If they do, to what extent will they use very strong technologies that prevent them from seeing how I'm interacting with their model? I think that'll be a big challenge. And the reason why is because the thing that LLM service providers are most scared about, in my opinion, is people stealing their models. And when you can't see the requests that you're making to the model, you can't know whether or not someone's trying to steal your model. And so I think it'll be very important for whatever technologies provide data privacy on LLMs, that they also provide an avenue to ensure that the private inquiries being made to that model are not somehow trying to distill another model or steal data from that model. I think that'll be very important. So it's going to be a challenge. And will these vendors that provide services on LLMs, will they embrace data privacy? That still remains to be seen. Because, ultimately, they're training on your inquiries as well, right? Your interactions with their models is valuable information to them. If they don't have access to that, they don't know if you're trying to steal your model. They don't know what it is that you're doing. They can't understand well how. So it's going to be a big challenge all around.
What is your opinion on the distinction between research and industry, and also academia labs in your area? Academia lab may be national labs.
Yeah, well, I haven't worked in a national lab. I've worked with people in national labs before, and I think, I think the tendency there is towards basic research, which is always, I hope we continue to invest in basic research because I think that's so important. So for in the area of computing, it'd be quantum and materials and how do we advance silicon or something besides silicon. I think that's very important. I worked in industry research. I was at Intel before I came to Michigan, and I worked in academia. And I think it's really important to have a symbiotic relationship with industry. I don't think it's really it's difficult for us to try and do advanced development for industry. Industry's doing its own advanced development, and they have more context than we do. So I think it's better for academics to go out in front of the advanced development, work out further ahead. Like, how can we create technologies that can create new markets? How can we create technologies that can broaden the benefits of heterogeneous design? That I think is better to do than to try and figure out, what's the next hot thing that'll make, NVIDIA continue to climb up the Moore's Law scaling ladder. I think NVIDIA's got that under control. But how do we provide them data privacy when they do model evaluation? How do we bring quantum computing to bear? How do we continue to lower the amount of energy that computing is going to need in a general fashion? Things like that, I think, probably provide a little bit more benefit. But that said, work on whatever you're passionate about. I think that's very important too. So hopefully you can find a good common ground between those two things.
Got it. And now come to the final fun question.
Oh,
if
cool.
you were not a computer architect, what will you do?
What would I do? Well, I have evidence of this. When I was in college, my dream was to become a stand-up comedian.
Oh.
And the way I approached that problem was I joined the improv groups that were at University of Wisconsin. And so the way improv groups work is you join the classes that they teach, and then at the end of the class, you graduate into the group, or you lose and you come back and you try it again. I lost twice. So I went through twice. I never got into the group. But it was a dream of mine. And I think improv is a really good skill to have as a faculty member, because it teaches you how to be funny in the moment. And I think it's always good to bring a little bit of lightness to your class, to a meeting, but do it in a way that's respectful and non-offensive to people. That is a constraint problem that you have to solve on the fly. And that's what improv teaches you. And it teaches you to think on your feet, which I thought was a good skill to have, and one that I think that I hold. And so even though that route never materialized for me, I do take away some benefits from my attempt to become a stand-up comedian.
And that will be a really amazing, interesting experience to sitting on the audience and listening Todd stand-up comedy.
Yeah. And I'm always most impressed by the clean comedians.
Oh,
right? Because that's yet another constraint on their comedy, right? Because blue comedians, as they're called, who can say any joke and can swear and use any word or any topic. They can talk about anything. They have full game. But the clean comedians, there are many of them out there, they can't do that. They have to work within a tighter set of constraints. So I'm always impressed by the clean comedians.
Maybe there's sometime in the future there will be a stand-up committee for our security itself.
Maybe.
Cool. Thanks so much for casting and helping us do the interview today.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, make sure to like and subscribe Todd's
Please do.
personal YouTube channels. And thanks so much for it.
Thanks so much.